Hello, I was a Jewish believer in Jesus for 42 years. I came to faith at the age of 18, and then 42 years later I decided to review my faith, and I decided to look in depth at why the Jewish religion did not believe in Jesus, and I surprisingly came to the conclusion that Jesus cannot, is not, will not, is not the Messiah, and has no place in Judaism. Right. This video is about considering the nonsense, the no sense of St. Paul. Just want you to consider my recent thoughts. St. Paul had a religious experience. He encountered Jesus. We all know the road to Damascus, right? We know by his own admission that St. Paul was a Jew. He was a Pharisee. He was, as he said, he knew his religion inside out. He knew everything. He would know the expectations of the Messiah. He would know what Jews should believe and also what they shouldn't believe. He would know exactly the reasons why Jesus couldn't be accepted as the Messiah from the Hebrew Scriptures. I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. He would have understood that is not on in Judaism, that all Jews have direct access to God. God doesn't take flesh, and so on. So he would have understood why the Jewish leaders, learned men who knew the Hebrew Scriptures inside out, back to front, had very deep reservations and concerns about some of the words of Jesus. Obviously not his little tales and things and little stories, you know. That's okay. Little stories are fine. But words like, I am the way, the truth, the life, no one comes to the Father but by me, are not okay. That's not okay. In my view, the Pharisees were quite right, quite responsible to be concerned about the things that Jesus was saying. How you deal with that when you have somebody in your community basically saying they're God, I don't know. I don't know how you deal with it. But they had every right, in my view, to be concerned. They were responsible in that respect. Of course, the New Testament doesn't portray them. They portray them as the baddies, but I see it as perfectly responsible. Now, St. Paul would have known all the reasons why Jesus could not be accepted as the Messiah. Because he's, as he claims, he was a learned Jew. He knew his scriptures. St. Paul wasn't a rabbi, but he claimed, to be, he knew his religion, right? So on the basis of knowing his religion, St. Paul, he probably had conversations with these Jewish believers in Jesus. He probably would have known and understood anything that they'd believed, perhaps from the Hebrew Scriptures, anything. He would have argued with them, probably, as people do, when you get together, and how can you say this when this, and don't you realise this and that. He would have had that. And then he goes on to persecute them, which I have to say, the evidence in the Gospels is that the Jewish authorities did not approve. They were against persecuting Jewish believers in Jesus, and that's in black and white there in the Scriptures. So he doesn't believe in Jesus on the basis of the Hebrew Scriptures. He knows the Hebrew Scriptures, just like the rabbis. No, Jesus is, you can't have anything to do with this man. So he responds by persecuting them. I don't agree with that, whatever, beheadings, whatever. No, that's not. No. And the Jewish authorities would not, and did not, and it's quite obvious from the account in the Gospels, would not have approved of that. It's, that's obvious. So St. Paul has a spiritual encounter with Jesus, he has his, which he believes is Jesus, on the road to Damascus, and he goes blind. He's blinded and things. Going blind is actually, what is known, it's not uncommon. I read about this. Sometimes it can be what's called an hysterical reaction. Trauma can cause somebody or something to be temporarily blinded. In the same way, some people through trauma can't speak. So it's not unusual. But on the basis of this religious experience, he now goes back to the scriptures that he knows, and he's got to find a way to justify this experience in the Hebrew scriptures. Because remember, this is a man who believed Jesus was not the Messiah based on the Hebrew scriptures, on knowledge, just like the rabbis did. This was an informed decision based on knowledge of the scriptures. So he's having to go back now in the light of this spiritual experience and somehow work with these scriptures to somehow make it seem that this religious experience is authentic, genuine, and it's kind of, he's got to kind of make it fit now. He's got to try and find scriptures and an explanation for this religious experience. Now, when God spoke to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, there were perhaps, 5 million. So 5 million people heard the voice of God. Right, that's pretty, a lot of people, isn't it? You can't imagine it, can you? You can't believe it. St. Paul is just St. Paul. It's just him on his own having a religious experience. And so many Christians do have religious experiences. And so many Christians do relate to this, to St. Paul, because they've had all sorts of weird experiences and seen odd things. But his actual faith has come from this spiritual experience. And I'm emphasising it because it suddenly dawned on me after 42 years that's what it's based on. The actual faith in Jesus has come through that religious, what he believes, experience. And now he's got to go back to the Hebrew scriptures and find a way of justifying it now. He looked before, no, Jesus is not the Messiah, no, to this, that, the other. And now he's got to find a way of trying to justify it. He will also have gone back to the rabbis and say, no, Jesus is the Messiah. I was wrong, I encountered Jesus. Well, that's not going to impress a rabbi. It won't impress any rabbi. Do you know why? Because God has warned us as a people to be very careful of supernatural activity and forces out there. We have to be very careful. We have to be very careful. And they would say, well, no, our faith is based, Saul, they would say, Saul, our faith is based on the Hebrew scriptures, on Torah. You've just had this some sort of whatever experience, but we can't accept that. You've had this vision or something, but we have been given Torah by God, and we can't just go changing everything just because you've had a spiritual experience. You yourself previously rejected Jesus as the Messiah based on the Hebrew scriptures, and now you're trying to say he is the Messiah based on your spiritual experience. And you've also gone back to the Hebrew scriptures now, and you are changing it all and telling us that it means something that you didn't believe before. So you're trying to sort of work out the spiritual experience. And can you see how ridiculous it sounds from a Jewish perspective that the rabbis can't accept this? But you can't have just rogue Jews saying, I have a vision of this, I have a this and a that, and expect the whole religion of Judaism to fall in step with your little apparition, your little daydream, your whatever. You know, it's like St. Peter, believes he has an encounter on the sea, and God somehow indicates it's all right to eat prawns, eat bacon, and so the implication is you don't need to keep kosher anymore. So the whole of the Jewish race now, because St. Peter's had a daydream, he's had an encounter, and it's spiritual experience on his own, that the whole of the Jewish nation now no longer obey the commands of God. Don't eat pork, don't eat pork, don't eat shellfish. But because he's had a little daydream, this fisherman, whatever, we're expected to believe St. Peter and obey him at the cost of God. In other words, we are disobeying God, who says don't eat shellfish, don't eat pork, and we're following the words of St. Peter, a fisherman who's had a daydream, and he suddenly thinks it's all right. Yeah, I think it's all right now. We can all eat prawns and shellfish. So we don't need it. We don't need Torah. We don't need to obey. We don't need to obey this and that. No. Can you hear? I mean, can you hear how ridiculous it sounds? Do you honestly expect the chief rabbi to start eating prawns and shellfish on the basis of St. Peter's daydream, his vision, his spiritual experience? Do you honestly expect the rabbis at the time of Jesus just to believe this, on the basis of St. Paul's experience, his religious experience? How can you have a religion whereby everybody's coming forward, individuals, I've had this vision, I've had this, I've had that, God said this to me. Can you imagine how crazy it is? The prophets in Judaism were verified by other prophets in Judaism. In other words, you can't just have any Tom, Dick and Harry coming along. I think God is saying it's all right now, we can do this on the Sabbath. I know he said don't do this on the Sabbath, but I think he said this to me, and I'm just telling you this. And so everybody's got to do what this person. Can you hear how ridiculous it is? And St. Paul is expecting the rabbis to believe this spiritual experience. He's had something's happened, obviously. We don't know. Something's happened. And we don't know why it's happened or what's gone on. But it doesn't make sense. And you have to, the point I'm trying to get here is the faith that has come about has come from a spiritual experience. And you do hear this quite a lot within Christianity. You do hear this quite a lot. You're hearing people saying Jesus appears to them. Jesus appears on toast. He appears in tea leaves. He appears in a cloud. He appears in an omelette. He appeared at a road crash. There's so many accounts around the world of spiritual phenomenon, and the Torah, the Hebrew scriptures do warn us about. Dare I throw the word occult in? I'm sorry if I'm causing offence, but we have to keep an open mind here about what's going on here. What is going on? There is magic in the world. There is magic. Moses threw down his staff in front of Pharaoh. It turned into a snake. The magicians could do exactly the same. They threw their staffs down. It turned into snakes. But guess what? Moses' snake ate up the other snakes. The God of Israel is supreme. The God of Israel is supreme above all other gods. So there is magic. There are spiritual forces out there. There can be apparitions and all sorts of things can happen. But the Jewish people are asked to believe in the Hebrew scriptures and in the one God, the invisible God. It's an invisible God. Our God is invisible. And that's what we believe in. And we believe in the Hebrew scriptures which are given to us by God. And everything has to be tested against the Hebrew scriptures. And St. Paul knew that. And that's why he didn't believe in Jesus. He'd already checked the scriptures. He knew, no, he's not the Messiah. This is all wrong. This is all wrong. People shouldn't be believing in him. We've got to stop it. Now, he used violent means, which I don't agree with. If they, he went overboard. And then, of course, when he has this religious experience, he then goes the opposite extreme, which is all. This tends to happen because he was an extreme personality. St. Paul was a very, very, very intense individual, and it's either one thing or it's either one thing or the other, But this is what I want to throw open to you. That is actual faith in Jesus began with that spiritual encounter. And then he's rummaging around the Hebrew scriptures, trying to twist them and make sense, and try and make sense of this spiritual experience. And maybe one could be sympathetic to him because if he's had this, he's had some experience and now he's trying to make sense of it. Now, even scholars say some of the writings of St. Paul are you can't really get what he's saying sometimes. And so I just leave that with you to consider.